What's going on, guys? Ryan Bomber Teacher in the house, and I am here with a somewhat new fun little series where I break down each region, my favorite Pokemon and my least favorite Pokemon, just so you guys kind of get to know what kind of Pokemon I like and dislike. Like, this idea came about due to inspiration from my good friend and fellow streamer Wondersoul, who actually asked me in a recent stream when I celebrated 300 followers over on Twitch, what my kind of favorite Pokemon from each region were. So I thought I'd take that one step further and record that as a video for you guys. So Wondersoul, this is for you, man. Hope you guys enjoy this one. It's gonna be a cool little thing to break down memory lane for me and various things like that. But we'll start with least favorite and then we'll move on to my favorites later on, so you guys get to see, so stick around to the end. So, please bear in mind, of course, that even if they are technically my least favorite, it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like the Pokemon. It just means that these Pokemon don't really stand out to me and I wouldn't necessarily pick them. And of course, if you don't have the same opinion as me and I dislike a Pokemon that you really like, that's cool. Don't worry about it. It's perfectly fine. We all have our preferences. So, let's go and break down my first one, which is my least favorite starter, and that is Blastoise. Now, for me, Blastoise just never really appealed to me, even as a child. Like, when I think back to my early days playing Pokemon Green in '96, and then moving further on, I never really ever picked Squirtle as a starter. I think I did it once, and I never enjoyed using it. So, for me, the whole evolutionary line just doesn't appeal to me. Mega Blastoise is cool, but I got fed up with his animation being really bad. I would have loved Game Freak to have had that big power moves coming out of his cannon on his back when it Mega Evolves. Still no luck on that. We're still waiting on that one, but yeah, nah. Blastoise, not really appealing to me all that much. I prefer Venusaur and Charizard way more. Next up for me is going to be Rad Akane. Honestly, this Pokemon just bores me. It's a rat. What more to say about it, really? Honestly, this Pokemon only really has relevance for me as a HM slave. I've never really tried to use it in competitive. Does get the Guts ability though, so you can run like a Guts Flame Orb set. Does get some decent moves, but honestly, other than HM slaves and playthroughs, I never really resonate with Rad Akane. Generally, if I think of Rat 1 Pokemon, I think of Pidgeot way more than Raticate, so Raticate just not really that appealing. Next up is the Pokemon that's been a source of frustration for a lot of players, and that is Zubat. Honestly, I have no problem with Golbat, I have no problem with Crobat. I actually like both of them, I've used both in competitive play, no problem. Zubat, my biggest source for frustration is the fact that it's literally everywhere. Everywhere there's a cave, you find a Zubat. Apart from in Black and White, where it was replaced by Woobat, but Woobat's not really much of an improvement either. Zubat, for me, just doesn't really have any appeal anymore. I've just got fed up with it. Got fed up with this very infuriating cry, and all the time I ended up having to deal with one, battle one and stuff like that. It's just not a Pokemon that really appeals to me very much. Next up we're going to talk about is going to be Parasites. Honestly, I feel like this Pokemon should get a little bit more, right? It's got a really cool design, it's got a really cool lore behind it, where like this mushroom's just like parasitically taking over this crab's life. It's a really cool like idea and concept, but this Pokemon just doesn't stand out to me as a Pokemon I would ever want to use. Like, when you think about grass types, even just in the Kanto region alone, you think of Venusaur, you think of Vileplume, you think of Victreebel. All of these are viable sun users because they have the ability Chlorophyll. Parasect's best ability is Dry Skin, which is weird because I would never really think of Parasect in a rain team, you know, especially when there's Ludicolo around and stuff like that. It just feels like this Pokemon just doesn't really know what it wants to be, and it's kind of sad because this Pokemon looks cool, but it's just not a Pokemon I would ever want to use, not a Pokemon I'd ever be that bothered about picking up. When you think about when you first encounter Paras, even in the Kanto region games, you can get Paras in Mount Moon when you go down the steps into like the into the lower parts of the cave and stuff like that. But at that point, if you started with Bulbasaur, you don't need another grass type, and bug types in Generation 1 and 2 for that matter were complete garbage. So yeah, just not really worth it for me. Parasect, kind of a disappointing Pokemon that definitely should have been better. Next up on the list is going to be Fearow. Honestly, this Pokemon looks cool. I actually really like Fearow as a design, but in playthroughs, you're probably already going to have Pidgey by the time you first encounter Spearow, which is in Route 4 on the way to Mount Moon in the Kanto games. So you've probably already got your flying type, so you probably don't really care about another one individually. And then competitively, even in Generation 1, it was outclassed by Dodrio. Dodrio was actually faster and has a higher attack stat, so didn't actually really give Fearow a place. So it kind of feels like Fearow and the Pokedex didn't really need to be there, right? You already have your Pidgey, you already have your Dodrio if you wanted one on later game. Obviously Dodrio is available on Cycling Road, I believe, in the Kanto games. I don't think you can get it before then. But yeah, generally speaking, you just would never really pick Fearow unless you really wanted to. For me, I would just always go for Pidgeot or Dodrio. So Fearow, kind of a forgettable Pokemon for me. Next up on the list is gonna be Hypno. Honestly, this Pokemon just bores me. It feels like a way worse Alakazam, and it just never really had any value to me. I never really cared much for Drowsy, I never really picked it up, and I picked up Hypno even less. As a Psychic type, even in Generation 1, it was massively outclassed by Alakazam and Exeggutor, and even Starmie for that matter. It just never really mattered. Slowbro, of course, does better as well, so there just isn't anything really for Hypno that makes it really usable. Did have a cool little plot line in the Sevi Islands, of course, in Fire Red and Leaf Green, where it basically was holding a little child captive, basically attacking this child and making sure it stayed there. I did have a nice little spot in the anime, of course, with Faber, but it's just such a forgettable Pokemon. I just would never pick it up. I wouldn't want to use it in a playthrough, or competitive for that matter. Just kind of a boring Pokemon to me. Now, the next 3 Pokemon on this list are all here for similar reasons. That's going to be Electrode, Graveler, and Coughing. All 3 of these Pokemon know Self-Destruct and Explosion, and you have no idea how many times these things have killed mons of mine in playthroughs and stuff like that. They're just really, really annoying Pokemon. They do have the different reasons for being really annoying. Of course, Electrode's really fast, but it doesn't really do much, though. Aside from its speed tier, it just sets up screens and explodes. Doesn't really have that much appeal going for it. Fun fact though, Voltorb was actually my first ever shiny Pokemon in Pokemon Gold version as a child. I got it in the Mahogany Rocket hideout. So yeah, fun little bit of trivia for you there. But yeah, Graveler I hated a lot because it was a trade evolution and it was a nightmare to get, especially at school when nobody really ever likes trading with you because it's always like, oh no, it's my Pokemon, and it's just so frustrating. I just never really liked the Geodude line in general, but I don't mind Golem so much. I think Golem's fine. Just Graveler, too many self-destruct kills, too many losses of encounters in Nuzlocke, or too many killed mons in Nuzlocke. It's just not really that good. And Coughing, honestly, aside from the anime in the early days, like Coughing just never appealed to me all that much. Didn't mind Wheezing so much, but Coughing, not really. And last but by no means least, in my least favorite list is going to be Wigglytuff. Honestly, Wigglytuff just never had any appeal to me. Even though they gave it the fairy typing, it's got a decent move pool and a competitive ability. As well as Frisk, which are not bad abilities these in general. Wigglytuff just never stood out to me. I would always prefer Clefable. And just honestly, Wigglytuff's kind of forgettable. Jigglypuff is actually a little bit cooler because of the anime. But Wigglytuff, kind of a bad evolution. Alright, so with that, I'm going to take a quick sip of my drink and then we're going to talk about my favourites. See you in a minute. Alright then, so favourites time. Now, favourites for me in this region have always changed over time. Some Pokemon that were on this list and are not on this list now, we'll talk about at the end. But first though, let's talk about my favourite starter, Venusaur. Now, obviously, a lot of people pick Charizard more, but I kind of got sick of how much attention Charizard got, so for me, Charizard kind of fell off my favourites list. But Venusaur has always stayed there for me. It was my favourite starter as a kid. I liked the grass starter going forward. Probably my best starter that I've used in the Kanto games. Really, really cool Pokemon, and competitive is actually very good because of its hidden ability Chlorophyll, so it is actually a very, very good Sun Sweeper. But yeah, Venusaur to me, always a Pokemon that's kind of stayed with me as a Pokemon that I like. It's got a really derpy animation in Let's Go, where it's like a weird frog animation, which is pretty funny. I kind of like it, but yeah. Venusaur, very, very cool Pokemon, really cool design, very, very nice Mega Evolution. I like this Pokemon for a lot of reasons. Speaking of liking Pokemon for a lot of reasons, let's talk about Aerodactyl, shall we? Now, Aerodactyl is one of my favourite fossil Pokemon. There's only one other fossil that will overtake it, and we'll talk about that in another region when we get there. But for me, Aerodactyl always had a really cool place for me. Playthrough-wise, I've used it quite a lot. I'm actually using it currently in a Fire Red Leaf Green 2v2 Soul Link over on Twitch, so definitely go check that out if you haven't already. But yeah, I love this Pokemon a lot. It means a lot to me. I've used it in competitive, of course, regular and mega forms. I've used both. Really enjoyed using both of them in playthroughs as well. Really, really cool Pokemon. I think this Pokemon has stood the test of time, really, in terms of the coolness factor of it. The only thing that's kind of disappointing is a shiny. Not a big fan of the pink shiny, but you know what? Doesn't really matter too much. I'm not huge on shiny Pokemon in general, but this Pokemon I have a lot of love for. Next up on the list is going to be Alakazam, of course. Probably most people's preferred pick in Generation 1 for Psychic types, only really narrowly beating out Exeggutor for me. I actually used Exeggutor a lot more in the early days of competitive in Generation 2. But Alakazam for me, really, really cool Pokemon, a fantastic design. Kind of sad it's not in Generation 8 at the moment. I would love to have it in Generation 8. But yeah, this thing is a monster. Very, very powerful Mega Evolution, of course. Really wide move pool. Use it quite a lot in competitive and in regular playthroughs as well. Definitely a very, very cool Pokemon, and I would love to see it back, personally. Next up on the list is going to be Dodrio, of course. I mentioned competitive, of course, in the early days of why I would pick Dodrio. And Fearow, of course, that attack stat is very, very strong. And in Gen 1 mechanics, with the crit ratio and the speed tier, it's a really, really underrated Pokemon. It has a very cool set of moves and stuff. Kind of did fall off a little bit in later generations once we had the physical special split and Tri-Attack wasn't as good anymore and stuff like that. But nonetheless, this Pokemon actually... very, very cool design. I love the 3 heads and stuff like that. I think it makes so much sense. I think it's a very, very good Pokemon. And, you know, I'd pick it up again if I had the chance to, and if it was actually a cool Pokemon to use in competitive, I'd love to use it. I've never really tried it. I'd have to shout Exo Stomp and see if Dodrio is actually viable in low tier, like National Dex or whatever. But, yeah, I don't know. Dodrio had a lot of cool Pokemon memories for the early games, especially Gen 2 competitive and Gen 1 competitive. But for me, honestly, Dodrio kind of falls off, but I really love this thing's design, so I'll absolutely keep this Pokemon in mind for later on. Next up is going to be Rhydon, of course. Rhydon, pretty much Kanto's premier Rock-type Pokemon. It does face a little bit of competition from Golem, but Rhydon, very, very cool Pokemon. Really amazing design, of course. Got a very good story behind it, of course, being one of the first Pokemon that they created, hence why you see all of the Rhydon statues a lot in the early games and stuff like that. I really love this Pokemon. I've used it in competitive, of course. I actually used it in the GPL Season 2 recently. It did only come to 1 game, but I loved having it on my team. It's just made me sad that I couldn't use it very well. But nonetheless, very, very good Pokemon. It's kind of stood the test of time. I still like it more than Rhyperior. I don't think Rhyperior is a good evolution for it. But yeah, this Pokemon's a monster, and I can't wait to use it again in the future. Next up, of course, shoutouts to my layout designer, of course, Nerdoking, who this is his mascot. But Nidoking, for me, always a fantastic Pokemon. Even in the early days, it's actually a very, very good Pokemon for speedrunning. It's got a wide move pool, so it can speedrun very easily. I actually watched a video recently on like the world record for like Pokemon Yellow, I think it was. That was really, really cool to watch, and he actually used the Nidoking, just repeatedly like taught it moves and stuff like that. But even competitively wise, aside from mid and speed tier, having Life Orb and Sheer Force as a combination, brutal. This thing's got a wide move pool, especially on the special side. So I've used it in competitive, I've used it in playthroughs. Love this thing to death, and I'll never get tired of this thing. And of course, Nerdoking having it as his mascot just makes me love it even more, because the guy's a legend just as much as the Pokemon. Alright, next up is gonna be Slowbro. Slowbro for me, I know a lot of people hate this Pokemon because of how bulky it is and stuff like that, especially when you put it at max. Thank you, Gamma. Anytime today. But yeah, Slowbro, of course, being max defensive, can actually just live while charging from Arcanine. It's just disgusting. This thing's incredibly bulky. I've had mixed success with it in competitive, but I generally really like this Pokemon's design. I still find the Shelter a little bit weird, that it's turned into like some weird kind of hermit. But nonetheless, this Pokemon has a lot of very, very cool stuff behind it. I've got a lot of memories with it in competitive and playthroughs alike. This thing does a lot. It's a very, very cool Pokemon, and I'd love to kind of consider using it again, but it's definitely one of the premier water types for me. So yeah, I'll have a lot of times where I've used Slowbro, and I'll never get tired of using it. Next up on the list is going to be Pinsir. Pinsir is a Pokemon that kind of came up more recently for me. Pinsir kind of didn't really get a lot of love in the early gens. It was a completely useless Pokemon for some time, as it actually, even though it was a bug type in the Kanto region, didn't actually get any bug type moves until Generation 3, I think, maybe 4. Which was kind of crazy for it. It was a bug type that basically only had fighting moves, so it was crazy to me. But yeah, Pinsir, very, very cool Pokemon. Really interesting Mega Evolution, getting its getting the Aerodactyl ability, I believe it is, so it gets its normal type moves to flying. It's kind of interesting. It grew a lot more for me in more recent years than it did in the early games, of course, because it wasn't very good. But yeah, really like this Pokemon. Definitely my favorite bug type in the Kanto region. I don't think there's another bug type that realistically competes with it. Scyther could compete with it, really, but I generally prefer Scizor. So yeah, Pinsir, definitely best bug, Gen 1. Next up, now most people are probably going to think this is a cop-out, but I really, really love Zapdos. I love the kind of jagged edges of its design. Kind of weird. It's shiny. Believe it or not, that is a shiny Zapdos on my screen, not a regular one. It's a bland shiny and all sorts, but it's a very, very good Pokemon. I think competitively I've had a lot of good memories with it, especially on OU. But it's just such an interesting Pokemon, and it's one of those Pokemon that you kind of wouldn't miss if you played the early Gen 1 games and you didn't actively go and look for it, or you knew where the power plant was because of the guidebook. But yeah, this thing, definitely very, very good in my book. Probably my favourite legendary bird by quite some way. Moltres comes a second, and Articuno is my least favourite, so yeah, Zapdos for me. Competitive wise, I've used it in a lot of rain teams and stuff. Too good to be true. And the last Pokemon on my favourites list, and the last Pokemon we'll talk about in this video, was, until Generation 7, my favourite Pokemon of all time, Ninetales. Now, Ninetales for me is always the one that I used to get memed on for at school for, because everyone's favourite fire type was like Charizard or Arcanine and stuff like that, Magmar in some instances, but nobody ever really like picked Ninetales for me. Now Ninetales, of course, in the early days wasn't the best Pokemon in the world. Obviously when it got the drought ability it was actually very, very nice, but for me this Pokemon had such an amazing design and origin behind it, and of course its shiny just makes it even better, although I have to be honest, not a big fan of the purple on the tips of its tail, but you know what, we can forgo that every now and then. But based on the Kitsune and the lore behind it and the story behind it, and even like the story behind the colouring of its original form and stuff like that, it's just amazing to me. I think this is a very, very well designed Pokemon, and it kind of appeals to me. Like, I like foxes in general, so having Ninetales in the arsenal is always a very, very good Pokemon. Of course, we all know historically Navrabombi's my favourite Pokemon, but Ninetales definitely up there in my top 10, probably of all time, and will probably stay there for a long time unless some really well designed Pokemon come into play. But either way, those are my favourite and my least favourite Pokemon. Let me know what your least favourite and favourite Kanto Pokemon are whenever you feel like. But yeah, I'm gonna get on out of here, so thank you so much for watching. My name is Rad Teacher. I'm your coach of the Royal Bomber from Mummies. Stay safe, stay awesome, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.